Yeah, welcome. What would you like to say? Why do we scare you?
Yeah. So before we dive in, can I just make sure I get clarity on a couple things? When you're
Sure.
talking about communism, are you starting with the idea that socialism is the control of the means of production by the state, and communism ultimately would be a stateless, cashless society in which there's a communal effort to have goods and services not owned by anybody?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. So there's this common misconception, and a lot of people who identify as communists, you'll see repeat this, right? Stateless, classless, moneyless society, right? Nowhere in any literature does anybody talk about this, right? Like this is not this is like a made up thing. This is not like a Marxism
Well,
thing.
I'm
This
mostly
is
just
not
trying to make sure
like
I
a
get the definitions correct, so I know that because
no, I
every
understand.
communist kind of has a different flavor of
I
communism.
understand.
So,
I
what
understand.
would you say
I
communism
I would
ultimately
say
ends up being? Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. The best way to understand communism is a movement, right? A historical movement, right? That has happened over hundreds of years, right? That has been built upon and built upon, and the ultimate goal of this movement is to eliminate class contradictions, right? So just like how capitalism eliminated the lords and the serfs, we want to eliminate the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. We don't want to have a class distinctions at all, and caste distinctions, right? Like race. We want to have just people. So
Yeah,
this is like the
I understand
communist
that.
movement
Yeah,
that changes and evolves over time and is implemented in different ways in different places,
but
right?
do you see how this isn't really answering what I'm asking? I'm trying to make sure that I understand. Are we trying to move towards a stateless society, and that is how we remove the idea of class?
Yeah, I mean, according to Marx, I mean, what he said is that the purpose of the state is to maintain class contradictions. And so if you remove class contradictions, then the state would wither away over time, right? That's Marx. Some people disagree with that, some people agree with that. Me, I don't think that that's necessarily relevant,
Hmm.
because we're talking hundreds of years in the future. Like we're not talking about recent things. That's a question
Well,
for
but
future
ideological
generations.
movements
That's,
are
that's not a question for us.
sure, but ideological movements are designed to start the seeds here in order to move towards some stated goal there, right? So even if it's this is
Yeah.
200 years, 300 years in the future, that's kind of irrelevant because you would be moving towards this goal now, and the goal is X. Do you see what I'm saying? So ultimately, I
Yeah,
guess
and like I said, the goal
yeah,
is
to eliminate
the goal
class.
is like yes,
Okay,
yes,
gotcha.
that's
So
the goal.
let's start with this idea of class. Do you think that
Hmm.
um, ultimately what the previous caller was trying to get across, I think, when he was saying the defiance of human nature, don't you think that class and
Hmm.
hierarchy is somewhat ingrained in the human psyche and consciousness for how we develop as tribes based on unique skill sets that people have that they can then capitalize on?
I don't think that there's a universal human nature. No. Um, and yeah, there are some hierarchies, but not all,
No, no, no.
right?
That's not what I'm not
Um,
even asking if
you
you
know, like
believe in hierarchy, but if it's the case that you think that hierarchy, I mean, hierarchies are obvious. If you think that hierarchies are often coming together because some people have unique sets of that are rare, and because of that, they tend to end up at the heads of these hierarchical structures.
I mean, if this is an analysis of capitalism, I completely disagree with this.
No, it's not. I'm not giving an analysis yet. I'm just asking a basic question about human nature and the view of the compatibility of what you would consider this political
Yeah.
movement of communism
Well,
intersecting
you're gonna
with
have
the
to be
nature
you're
of people.
well, you're gonna have to be more specific, right? Because when you say human nature, right, when you say that the natural tendency of human nature for the best people to end up at the top, well, this clearly isn't the case for kings, right? Kings are born into being king. It doesn't matter if you're good at it or
But
bad
they
at
don't
it.
stay
You're
king
born
unless they're
that
good at
way.
it.
That's not true, man.
It is true.
That's definitely not true.
There's
No.
most of Europe is riddled. Well, Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and then same thing in Rome. If you were really bad at being a king, it would often lead to your demise. So that is in fact a case in point. So,
how long was Emperor Nero king?
well, he wasn't a king; he was an emperor.
For how long?
I'm not sure
know.
how long Nero was emperor, but wasn't correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember my Roman history specifically, but wasn't Nero assassinated?
Was he?
I think he was. I think wasn't Nero. Yeah, take a look real quick.
Let's see.
I believe he was, bro. Specifically because he was bad.
Okay, he was born in 37, but when was he? Oh, his reign was from 54 to 68.
Okay.
Yeah, now I'm curious too.
Yeah, I couldn't remember. I know Caligula. I think he was unalived. I'm sorry, I don't mean to use the wrong word on the TikTok. I know he was unalived, and I don't remember Nero though, if he was or he wasn't. So, but the point being is that I guess when I'm talking about, so we don't get too sidetracked, when we're moving into the idea of communism itself, maybe I can just move to some basic questions instead, so we don't get bogged down on like ontological arguments of human nature. Would that be okay with you?
Oh, Nero unalived himself.
Oh, the stress of ruling. Didn't he? Maybe he had a disease or something. I can't remember. I'm not very skilled.
I think he was.
I'm not with
he
Roman history, specifically with hierarchical rulers.
Yeah.
That's outside my normal purview.
He won.
Can I ask you this?
Yeah.
How is it that you are able to, and this is a question I always have for communists that drives me crazy. I would contend that the thing that's taken people out of poverty more than anything else is unique access to capital. That has been the thing which has been the most responsible for the removal of poverty around all of the Western world, is that now peasants, or what you consider the lowest class of people, actually have access to capital, and then they can build off of that capital. That's what I would argue. And so what I'm asking you is, like, how do you intercede on this thing? By access to capital, I mean things like home loans, for instance, things which would be unachievable for people to save up under normal circumstances over the course of 10 or 15 years, $100,000 or $150,000. It's not actually very possible for most people to do that. So my question just becomes, absent access to capital, what is it that how is it you're bringing people out of poverty here exactly?
Well, I mean, historically, I mean, the two countries, right, to bring the most people out of poverty, to have the most like dramatic economic transformation of the country, have been the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China, right?
But you would call that state capitalism, right? Not communism.
I mean, I think you can call it socialism.
It's more like state capitalism. I mean, the access of the common person to access capital and loans in order to bring themselves out of poverty was a primary reason that the peasant class of China was able to bring themselves out of poverty, right? Because they could access capital.
Access capital to get loans. That's the reason why China has a 90 something percent home ownership rate.
Yeah, that would be why, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if that's true or not.
Well, how else do you think that they're getting homes, bro? They're buying them, right? And they're using loaned money in order to buy them.
Well, Well, in China, you can't like you don't all land is owned by the state, right? You don't privately own land. It's leased for 99 years, right? And then, there's some other laws where you can, pass it down to your family and things like that.
Yeah, but how do they acquire
special
these
laws.
things? The state doesn't give it to them. They have to buy it. They're buying these properties, right? Yes. The answer is yes.
Sure.
They're buying them. So the thing is that absent access to capital, how do you have the underclass actually bring itself out of poverty if they can't access capital? I would argue that the reason you had peasants in Europe and the feudal system to begin with was because peasants they did not have access to capital at all. I mean, none. And after the Black Plague went through, suddenly they did have more access to capital based on the lands that were transferred to them. So the question just becomes, how is it that you can have people move themselves out of poverty absent access to capital? That's always been my question.
Why is that a relevant question in like discussing capitalism and communism?
What do you? Well, I mean,
Why is that
it would be
relevant?
the most relevant because my assumption here is that you want to move away from people having access to capital and instead the state dispersing all goods and services, right?
Well, that capital being in the hands of the private means, right? That's the question. And if all that capital is held in the hands of like very, very few, then how are people supposed to have access to that capital?
Well, they get access to that capital through equity loans. So rich people tend to loan their money out because it makes them more money, and that's how people get access to it.
But so why do you think that it's the case that in China there's such a higher home ownership rate than in the U.S.?
Because of the
And in
access
all,
that they have to loans that they didn't have under Mao and they didn't have under other leadership. They didn't have access to capital in order to start their enterprises.
so the reason is that China has more loans than the U.S.
Well, I'm not sure that they have more loans, right? But what I am saying to you is that it's the access to capital that allows for the underclass to bring itself out of the poorhouse. So absent access to capital, I'm not sure how that's done.
I don't think you understand what I'm saying, right? So let me be clear.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that in China, there's over a 90% home ownership rate. In the United States, it's about 60, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you explain, if access to capital is the end-all be-all in the great explainer for everything, how do you explain that?
Well, that's not really an argument. So the idea here,
it's a question.
Yeah,
It's not an argument at all. It's a
agree.
question.
So the idea here is that in China, they're trying to move people away from the rural areas and into the major meccas. Okay, when you're talking about home ownership, there you have to be very specific about what you mean. Do you consider a person who has a leased apartment to be a homeowner? Because I don't. And I do consider the fact that they still have access to capital as being the primary reason why the under-peasant class was able to rise itself up and try to create some sort of middle class. Same thing happened in the United States. If you couldn't have had a middle class unless they had access to capital itself. They have to have access to it because private enterprise, the underclass
You're not
for
addressing my
private.
question.
Yeah, go ahead. What's the question?
My question is, why is there a disparity when comparing the U.S. to China? Why in China is there such a much higher percentage?
What does China consider home ownership to be? Let's start with that.
I mean, it's not what China considers it to be. Like, it's what the World Bank considers it to be.
Let's start. Let's start with what home ownership is considered. If you say over 90% of the Chinese people own their homes, what does that mean?
Yeah, but I don't think that the World Bank uses a different standard for home ownership in China and in the U.S. I don't think that it uses a different standard.
Well, I don't see why it wouldn't.
Right.
Why wouldn't it?
The World Bank?
Yeah, sure. Why couldn't it? So I would need to know distinctly, are they considering home ownership?
Do you know what?
Yeah, yes, I'm aware of what the World Bank is, but you're making a statement, an affirmative claim, I'm asking you specifically what the criteria is here for what they consider home ownership to be.
But I think that's silly to assume that the World Bank would use a different standard. Like,
what's
that
the
question's
standard
not
at all that
relevant.
they're using then?
But that question's not relevant
It's
if the
the most
standard is the
relevant.
same for each country.
Well, no, it still
But
would
if
be
the standard's the same,
it would still be very relevant, because absent us understanding what the standard is, we might have a very, very distinct view on what we would consider ownership to be or not to be. So what is the standard that they're using here?
so let me ask you this.
Hang on. Do you don't know?
Consider?
I just want to make sure you don't know what the standard is, right?
No, I don't know specifically how the World Bank measures home ownership.
Okay.